Hello everyone, it's episode 16 and I'll continue talking about my dad because I haven't hardly said anything about him. In with most people, their mother is the more tender, affectionate, demonstrative in love, and the father's more cold, sometimes distant, sometimes, macho men are not affectionate, terribly affectionate. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. But they tend to be less affectionate than women. In my case, it was the opposite. My father was the kind, soft, tender, affectionate one. Although he was not effeminate, he was not a sissy. He was a real he-man. But he wasn't a he-man in the violent sense of the word. Like he wouldn't beat anybody up like my uncle would. My uncle would beat someone up, and he did in our house one time. So my uncle was the outdoorsman, the man who worked with his hands in factories and construction, and he was a chauffeur. He was in the military. He was more aggressive in a physical macho man sense. My father was an intellectual. Wherever we went with my dad in Lithuanian circles or in any circles who were affiliated with us, he was always recognized as the elder. By elder I mean the brain. In every gathering of Lithuanians where we all got together, and we did that periodically, it was constant. It was a constant. We had a cultural community. He was an integral, important part, and he was always the leading speaker. Now, you might say, well, Raza got her pointers from him, but nobody else in the family did. Not a single other person. Not a single one took pointers as far as speaking in public. But I did. All right, so he was always recognized as the smartest person. So whenever there was an opinion, a question to be asked and to be answered, everybody would look at him. He was like the elder statesman. Not that he was an old man, I mean even when he was young, but he was much older than Mom. Now, the way they got married, I might as well throw this in. The way they got married is, and this would be a pattern that my mother would follow for the rest of their years together. My mom's parents, my Russian Mongolian grandmother and my Lithuanian grandfather, had what in America would be called a plantation. So it was a villa, you might say. They had a nice big house and many, many crops, fields that were harvested by what's called peasants in Russia, or Lithuania and Russia. They call them peasants. Here they call them farm workers or field workers or migrant workers. And my grandfather owned a general store and a pharmacy. And my grandmother was an incredible embroiderer. She embroidered. And she also was a mistress, administrator of a private girls' school. I don't know if she taught. I don't know the details about my grandmother, all the details. I don't know if she was a teacher, but I know she was an administrator, like the minister of the school. So my dad and my mom were very cultured. They're into, and that's why I love it, classical music, ballet, opera, and literature. They were very good at it. They didn't have to teach us. They just followed these things, and we all became the same, and we were also religious. All of us were religious. So back to my dad, what he was like. So finally, I'm 10, going on 11. I know Dad will never be with us. I went through a crisis a terrible crisis. It was so bad that I even lost my faith. I began to doubt, which was very unusual for me. Is there really a God? There is a chance there might not be a God. And I remember talking to my fellow 10-year-olds. I don't know for sure if there is a God. You know, things like that. Because I was a girl of prayer. I used to pray for things and they would happen. I would pray for healing, it would happen. Things happened when I prayed because I had incredible faith. And this also explains, by the way, Robert Lee Erden, a great minister, and many other ministers that I have heard and studied and read, they say the devil knows who God has her mark on. They say he, but I say she. God has chosen a certain person for work, for anointing, for leadership, for mission. The devil, from the time that they are children, will try to kill and destroy that child. And the devil worked through my mother and my brother and the people that she marshaled to hurt me. That was the devil. It was the devil. Okay, now back to I'm 10 years old and I'm devastated. One night, I am supposedly sleeping in a living room. My mother and my brother, my evil brother Jimmy, and my mother and other members of the household are in the kitchen. I'm supposed to be asleep, but I'm awake. And I hear my mother making the pact. It begins with, she goes on a long litany of how evil I am. Me, I'm 10 years old, how evil could I be? It was all because I love Dad. You know, I said that before. It was all because I love Dad, therefore I am evil. She said, she's this, she's that, and I began just crying. I could hear it, you know. It was horrible. I don't remember the specifics because none of it was true. It was all lies. You know, it was exaggerations and twisting things up. That I am basically, that was her constant phrase, was that I was uncontrollable, I was out of control, and she needed help. That's the same thing she would say when she went to the school, when the school would call her in if I played hooky. Because I did a lot of hooky playing when I was 15. Because of the abuse. I couldn't stand it. I couldn't stand it at home. I couldn't concentrate in school. It was horrible. And she would tell them how awful I was, how wonderful she was. A great mother who was abandoned by her husband, raised all her children by herself. Oh, it's all lies, lies, lies. It was the opposite. It was the opposite. And the other members of the family, my brother Jimmy and the other members of the family said, "Oh, we'll help you, Mom. We'll help you keep her under control." What that was open season on me. They were given the writ, the permission, and the sanction to abuse me. Anything they would do to me that was negative was approved, had her stamp of approval, basically, she was saying. And I remember sobbing. I was lying in that bed sobbing. I tried so hard to keep my sobbing quiet so that they wouldn't hear me. But it was just awful. It was just awful how I cried, how I sobbed, how they plotted against me, the three of them. And from then on in, there we go. That's my point right here, right now. My point right now is, from then on in, they became my enemies. Whereas before she was a mean person, she would persecute all of us equally. She stopped persecuting them, and it was all on me, just me. to be